Hi, my name is Jasmine Brooks, and I am the creative producer on the Better Future series here at Company One Theater. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Thank you all so much for joining us for episode 1 in our inaugural digital event. Along with our panelists, we are joined by Crescenciano and Daisy, who will be our ASL interpreters for today. At this moment, I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in present-day Boston, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Wampanoag and Massachusetts people. It is important to understand and honor the history of the indigenous land that we occupy and our own place within that history as we work towards a more just future. Thank you. So the purpose of the Better Future series is to gather together Boston's artists, community leaders, and policymakers to better understand the needs of our neighborhoods and to reimagine the future of our city, both in response to the current pandemic and our ongoing fight against the deep-rooted race culture of white supremacy. Each episode will happen once a month and will always be on a Friday at 1 p.m. So stay tuned for future episodes. And now I am so excited to introduce our first performance from playwrights Kit Yan and Melissa Lee. Kit and Melissa are the current Company One PlayLab Pao Fellows. And through the partnership with Company One and the Pao Arts Center, they are working this season to develop a new musical with and for Chinatown residents to uplift the unique narratives and concerns of the Chinatown community.
Hi, my name is Kit, and I'm honored to be here today to share some of Melissa and I's work with y'all. We are going to start with a song called Why I Share Today from our new musical Interstate. Interstate follows a transgender spoken word artist and a lesbian singer-songwriter as they travel the country from east to west, sharing their music and activism. Along the way, they inspire Henry, a 16-year-old South Asian transgender teenager who lives in Kentucky, whose family and community does not support him. When he finds out about the band, he decides to go and see a show of theirs. In Why I Share, Henry's mom has just thrown out his testosterone, and Henry sings about why he shares his story and struggles with the internet. We thought we'd open with this in a time of much political activism and conversation on social media and online as we move through a pandemic, an uprising and revolution, and the movement for Black lives in this country. Thank you so much and enjoy.
Small town kid with the light brown skin in a locked room every night. The album plays and the kid just lays in bed, his eyes shut tight. A voice comes through, robust and deep, like a man who found his way, saying everything's alright. His mom walks in as he wipes his skin, getting ready to inject. She's shocked to find all the tools that bind his heart inside his chest. And she breaks down into a sobbing heap, and she's desperate to reflect, saying, what did I do wrong? Did I do something wrong? Father can't know mother pleads. Think about what father needs, and no one cares to listen. No one here can hear me. That's why I share. That's why I share my life into a screen. Between her tears, she confronts her fears of what her daughter has become. You may try till the day I die, but you'll never be my son. Bags up his things, recites a prayer, and burns his saving grace, thinking this can be undone. Mistakes can be undone. Father can't know mother pleads. She destroys what her you, come on, God. I'm running out of time. How long does it take the tea to take effect? This song's the only thing standing between me and the rope around my neck. Hell-bent on shutting me down. I'll use your cash to get out of town. If only I could see them, if only I could meet them, I would find my way out. Father, can't know my heart bleeds. No one cares what this boy needs, and no one cares to listen. No one here can hear me. That's why I share. That's why I share my life into a scream. Oh, oh.
Thank you so much, Kit and Melissa, for that performance. I'm excited to now start our conversation. Our panel will be featuring Kit Yan and Melissa Lee, who you just saw in that video, City Councilor at Large Michelle Woo, Boston Chinatown Neighborhood Center's new CEO, Ben Hires, and the director of the Pao Arts Center, Cynthia Woo. So I'm going to pass it over to Karthik Subramanian, who is the interim managing director here at Company One. He's going to act as our moderator for today's discussion. And just so you all know out there, please feel free to drop any questions that you have, any comments in the comment section, and we will try to get to them. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Jasmine. Hi, all. My name is Karthik. I'm the interim managing director at Company One Theater, and my pronouns are he, him, his. Panelists, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. I'd love to get us started with, I think, just expanding a little bit. Jasmine quickly introduced who y'all are, but I'd love to get a quick sense of what you do beyond your names and titles, and then we will dive into the rest of the conversation. I would love to start with Pao and Kit and Melissa, and then move on to Michelle, and then Ben. With that, Cynthia, could you tell us a little bit more about Pao?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cynthia Woo. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm just really excited to talk a little bit more about Chinatown today with you all. Just to introduce those out there who are not familiar with Pao Arts Center, we are actually a program of Boston Chinatown Neighborhood Center, BCNC, but also at the same time a collaboration with Bunker Hill Community College. And we were founded or started in 2017. Pao Arts Center was really formed in response to the fact that while the Asian American community is rapidly growing in Greater Boston, it really remains underserved by local arts and cultural institutions. At the same time, displacement threatens Chinatown's unique characteristics and its importance as a gathering space for our community. By promoting the cultural vitality of Chinatown, it represents a commitment both from BCNC and Bunker Hill, BHCC, to invest in Asian American artists and community members, and that creativity and culture are really an essential part of individual and community health and well-being. The mission of Pao Arts Center is to celebrate and strengthen the Asian Pacific Islander community of Chinatown and also Greater Boston by providing accessible and culturally relevant art, education, and creative programs. And we seek to empower communities to learn and thrive socially through artist service, placemaking, education, and presentation programs. One of these programs that we are really excited about is the program that Kit and Melissa are a part of, that we are partnering with Company One, the C1 PlayLab Pao Fellowship, which is in its inaugural cycle. As Jasmine very nicely introduced, over the next 2 years, Kit and Melissa will work through community-centered art making to help create a new theatrical work for Chinatown residents and to uplift the unique narratives and concerns of the Chinatown community. And I think it's worth mentioning that this 2-year fellowship really expands an already deep collaboration between Pao Arts Center and Company One. Last year, we collaborated on presenting some public programs related to Viet Gone with open rights and performances at the Chinatown Gate. Kit and Melissa, I should say, were selected through a jury process made up of Company One members as well as Chinatown community members. And they were really selected for their personal connection, investment, and interest in engaging the community and uplifting the stories of Chinatown. And personally, for the Pao Arts Center, we're really excited to work on this project because it really puts Chinatown at the front and center, and it tells the story of Boston's Chinatown. And it also affirms the Pao Arts Center and Company's One distinct presence as collaborators, important component or important player in Boston's cultural landscape. And it's a unique blend of our interest in community engagement, artist support, and investment in artistic creation. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. With that, I'll actually hand it off to Kit and Melissa. Do you all mind just telling us about who you are, the work you're doing, both within this process and outside of here?
Sure. Hi, my name is Melissa, she, her, hers. I am a musical theater writer, composer, lyricist, and book writer. I work very closely with Kit. I'll let him introduce himself. But I grew up in Boston, so I have very deep roots in Boston's Chinatown. My family works in Chinatown. And I grew up in Boston. So our work is we worked on several musicals, but the one that you heard from earlier in this program was from the musical Interstate, which Kit mentioned in the intro, is about a transgender slam poet who goes on tour with a lesbian singer-songwriter. We've been working on that show for 8 years, and we recently had a world premiere in Minneapolis. And Kit, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Kit. I use they, she, and he pronouns. I'm really excited to be here today, and really excited about this fellowship in general. I'm currently dialing in from Hawaii, where I grew up. But when I left, I went to college right outside of Boston. I went to Babson, and then my first job was at the Suhu Insurance Agency on Washington Street. And then after that, I worked at ACDC. And through my post-college sort of like life in Chinatown, I met Melissa through performance. And actually, close to Chinatown, we solidified our friendship at Jacques, where we were performing every month at a queer Asian cabaret. And so Boston Chinatown is certainly in my heart, and very important to the kind of artist that I became. During our fellowship, we're like super excited because we'll spend the year in conversation, researching and witnessing the community conversation that is happening in Chinatown, which currently is shifting quite rapidly, and so we're super excited to be here today in conversation with y'all and addressing our current times.
Thank you, Kit. With that, we'll head over to Michelle. Thank you for being here. If you don't mind telling us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to right now.
Hi, everyone. It's such an honor to be part of this first conversation and with the incredible people and leaders who are in this virtual room together. My name is Michelle Woo. I use she, her pronouns. I serve on the Boston City Council in my fourth term. And I'm someone who never thought that I was going to be in government, much less politics, growing up. A big part of why I ended up falling in love with Boston and finding my way to advocacy was through Boston's Chinatown, the incredible community, the people, the organizations, and the sense of home that it gives so many of us. Going to be even if you don't live much less politics, you find yourself going back. A big part of why I ended up sustenance. So I know it's been incredibly difficult for the whole community, for everyone during COVID-19 and this pandemic, but especially in Chinatown, we've been really hard hit for a long time. And so it's nice having a group here who can help reflect some of what's next for our community and what Chinatown represents for everyone in a way that will continue to grow our connections and the intersectional ways in which we all need to stand up for a recovery that is just economically, racially, socially. And so I'm really happy to be here with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And finally, Ben, do you want to talk about your new position and how you got there?
Yeah, thanks, Karthik. Thanks to Company One for hosting us all today. And I'm honored to be on this panel with my fellow guest. Ben Hires, I use he, him, and his. I am the new CEO of the Boston Chinatown Neighborhood Center, BCNC. And BCNC is a 50-year-old community-based organization, social service organization that provides family-centered, culturally competent programs. And, we're really focused on helping build a thriving Chinatown, build thriving socially just and equitable community, and focused on building up strong families. And we're fortunate enough to serve over 3,000 families and adults through our 4 locations in Boston, Quincy. And I've been in Boston for about 20 years now, a little over. And for about 10 years, I worked on the border of Chinatown at the Boston Children's Chorus. So I've seen firsthand kind of the development of Chinatown for the last 10, 15 years. And I've spent some time at the Boston Public Library where I really took to heart, the importance of public service. So I'm really honored to be here at BCNC now and with all of you talking about Chinatown today.
Thank you, Ben. That was the presentee part of this session. I think beyond this, I'll be asking questions and it's going to be free-flowing. Feel free to kind of step in and out as necessary. Thank you all for your, I didn't frame it that way, but I really appreciate the connection that you'll identify to Chinatown within this conversation. And that's where we'll start from. Something that I know we would love to know is we're talking about right now 2 different crises. There's obviously everything that's happening with Black Lives Matter, and we'll get to that slightly later in the conversation. But starting with the original crisis of COVID-19 and the pandemic, could you talk to the impact that it's had both for Boston Chinatown and just the API communities in Boston?
I'll jump in if there's no one else wants to jump in.
Thank you, Michelle.
It's just been such a time of hurt across the board, and I mean that in multiple ways. Our community has always been resilient, right? The reason why Chinatowns anywhere exists is because immigrants had to find a way to support each other in a very harsh and often hostile, racist environment. And when they made their way here and were part of building up this country, right? Literally building the infrastructure that made it possible for this country to grow and to keep expanding. And so, I'm someone who grew up in an immigrant family as well. My parents came to the US from Taiwan to Chicago in the mid 80s. And I remember growing up, there was lots of sort of open signs of discrimination, people mocking you or saying things as you were out and about and related to race and your appearance and all that. And, I found a home in Boston. And I think the country had also shifted in terms of what was at least publicly acceptable when talking to others. And it felt like we were in a different place. But when COVID started, when the news of the pandemic coming out of China began to hit mainstream news, it was very clear that we were resurfacing a lot of, for me, long ago forgotten, or, it had just been a while since I felt as visible and as invisible at the same time, right? When you have the President of the United States openly connecting and leaning into stereotypes about Asian Americans to try to shift blame for the virus away from his administration, that gave cover and incited and fueled racist and xenophobic stereotypes. So we saw that Chinatown was one of the first hit communities, even before the virus was really widespread or spreading in the United States. Chinatowns everywhere, and right here in Boston, saw a huge loss of business. People, whether conscious stereotypes or just unconscious bias, choosing not to come, choosing not to spend their money there, and businesses were incredibly hurt already. And then just story after story from constituents of, students at school being bullied by others who were hearing, recycling things they must have heard from adults about how this Asian American student was to blame for the virus, or even myself and my family getting on the T in those early days on the subway and noticing everyone kind of stepping away a little bit, just feeling very, again, like you're part of this mass of people that was blamed for something. And this is not new in the history of Asian Americans in America, but something that I think will continue to impact Chinatown and the AAPI community even after the public health piece of this has passed. So we have a lot of work to do. Certainly, I know we'll get to this later in the conversation, but that does include and depend on us standing up against racism, period, right now for all communities, especially the Black community in this moment.
Ben, you wanted to kind of build on that?
Yeah, just to pick up on what Michelle was sharing, that, I think in Chinatown, and particularly for us as an agency serving, an immigrant population, we began pretty much earlier, probably much earlier than the mainstream, hearing about the concerns and the fears from our families and our students, our adult students that may have been traveling back from Asia, or from hearing from family members in China. And so, as an agency trying to, alleviate their fears or answer questions about whether they should be quarantined or should they come into Chinatown for services and for work. So I think as an organization, we've had to, sort of struggle with these questions that everybody's now diving into in terms of reopening or what's safe, et cetera. And just to reiterate that, so many people have been, negatively impacted in terms of their livelihood, employees' hours being worked or losing jobs, and small businesses. It's been incredible hardship, which I know a lot of people across the country in a lot of different parts of our city are being impacted. But I think in particular, Chinatown, as Michelle said, really, hit hard. And, in addition, in addition to the public policy and the public messages coming out of the White House, there's, social media can get out of control, and a lot of messaging can occur that way. And again, our young people and our families hear that, and really fear is one of the, most challenging things, because you never know when it can get you, and it can really paralyze you from going about your sort of normal life. So a lot of work and a lot of healing ahead, I think.
And I think we kind of started touching about this, but what would be great to know is, I know for those of you who don't know, I also worked at the Pao Arts Center, like very briefly before I kind of took over the managing director position at Company One. And I know one of the things that landed, I shouldn't have been surprised that it totally still like blew me away with working there is obviously how much Chinatown is beyond just restaurants, and I think some of the forward-facing aspects of the community that you end up seeing. So something that'd be great to know is so what's been the impact beyond? I think a lot of the narratives that we see is how restaurants and some of the forward-facing businesses have been impacted. Are there stories or there narratives that exist beyond that that might be worth amplifying at this moment?
Oh, I'll jump in. So piggybacking on kind of what Ben alluded to, just like even in our own community and sort of confusion or questions from constituents about safety, it's not just people coming from quote unquote the outside, but even in the community itself, there's a lot of talk about what's safe and what's not, like interns even, some of their parents being like, I don't know if you should go work in Chinatown as early as January. And I'll even say, Lunar New Year was at the beginning of this. And we, along with the rest of Chinatown, had the Lunar New Year parade and celebrations. It was early February. So it was like right after one of the first reported cases had come out of a student coming back. And, we were in and we had call after call from like press, so not even talking about social media, but press painting the narrative of, are you still having this Lunar New Year celebration? So when we think about these cultural traditions and activities that are also so important as part of our identity and binding us together, like another role of Chinatown, beyond social services and restaurants and also just cultural ties and what Michelle was mentioning, like finding home in a community, thinking about the impact on constituents of not even feeling safe in your own home, or people, not knowing what to believe in media. Like there was just so much information out there. So I think that it's a long-term starting to be like a psychological impact that we have to think about long-term what effect will be.
Michelle, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, and just really quick, a bit of data that had come out as the city was starting to take on testing for COVID-19 as well, that the API community was the only community where there was a pretty big discrepancy between the percentage of positive cases tested and the percentage of fatalities, meaning that we were making up a much larger proportion of fatalities than testing. And so there was some concern. I think there's been much more multilingual outreach and focus on community organizations helping to carry the message. But early on, it became clear that there maybe folks weren't feeling comfortable getting tested, were worried about being out and engaging in that, and just a sense of potential isolation happening, whether because of the stereotypes and the racism, or because of fear of exposure to the virus. So there was, there was some work done, but we're still seeing a little bit of that gap in the API community today.
And Ben, you wanted to add something? You're muted, Ben.
Thanks. I wanted to pick up an answer to your question around, I think, the arts community, right? Not only the arts community and artists in Chinatown, but across, Boston and the country. And I'd love to hear maybe Kit and Melissa's thoughts on that from folks in their network. But, obviously artists too have been, hit very hard, both from the pandemic, but through, the the racism that's been occurring too. And I think, our artists are one of our strongest allies in terms of uncovering and talking about and bringing to the surface these issues and these stories, and can be one of our powerful allies in bringing community together. But when when your work is gone and your employment is gone, that can be really challenging. So, your comment about, Chinatown is more than just restaurants and such, we have and the Pao Arts and Company One are right there with us, really trying to, support our artists that are out there, support our young people who are interested in creative employment and creative endeavors. So I just want to raise them up.
And yeah, thank you for that's where I was really interested in next is something that the reason we also kind of pulled this panel together and we have artists in the conversation is there's just something about regardless of what kind of art we're talking about, like the power of like having it contextualize a lot of advocacy, or actually contextualizing policy and informing a lot of advocacy, and really we truly believe that. And I'm kind of curious as to Kit and Melissa where you all intersect with that conversation, both to Ben's point of what is the role of artists in this conversation, and like how are artists also impacted in this conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for opening this conversation, Ben. The first thing that came to mind when we were thinking about how this has hit us is something that Cynthia was speaking about a little bit in terms of gathering. So Melissa and I primarily work in the theater, though now we have quite a bit of digital content that is coming out. given that our work has moved online. But for those of us in live arts, gathering and performance and being together is the most important thing. It's like energetically what we do is to create a space in which people can gather and feed off of each other, and then also leave that space and digest and have a conversation and challenge each other in their thinking and sort of like create community in that way. And so when we're sort of left without the ability to gather and share information and just like process artistically, I think some people, for a lot of people, that is how they engage with what is happening. And like Ben said, there's a lot of power in speaking up and speaking out in terms of the arts. People really, it's like a platform for you to move through this world. And so I think for Melissa and I, we certainly are missing the live element. We actually had a production canceled like right in the beginning of its run. And so we were not able to fully realize our musical's run in Minneapolis. But the, you know, like our opening song, the internet does create a platform for us to connect a little bit as well with people. I do think though that the internet is certainly like a younger platform. And so I do also worry that like, if this pandemic cannot happen, Melissa and I would be in Boston all year engaging in an intergenerational, like multi-community, multi-street sort of dialogue. And that is something that we have felt like probably cannot be bridged during this pandemic. But Melissa, I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, I totally, basically, I feel the same way that when it happened, I mean, of course, like a lot of theaters, everyone's trying to figure out how to adapt to the current situation and keep making art and keep making theater. But the truth of the matter is like theater just cannot be replicated in the same way, right? Online, it just can't. We can continue to tell stories, and that's what we've been doing. We're continuing to dream. We just did a Plays at Home commission where it's during COVID. It's meant to be read at home so people can imagine sort of in their brains. But Kit is right. You know, really is no comparison to being in the same space and like feeling each other's energy and laughing when other people are laughing. And you know, and we create primarily queer and like trans work, and the importance of seeing another trans body, another queer body on stage is also irreplicable. So I don't have any answers. I just know that these are all questions of what this looks like in this particular world, and we're still trying to navigate it. We had a conversation with the folks at Company One about exactly what this fellowship would look like in the next 2 years as well, depending on whether or not things change. So there's definitely an impact, but we're really grateful for the theaters that have stepped up to continue to fund our work and continue to give us a place to dream and write and continue to tell our stories, because like Ben says, it's really important for artists to be able to speak their voice, especially at times like these, so that we can sort of be agents of change in whatever way we can.
Ben, you wanted to add something to that?
Well, I just wanted to thank Kit for bringing in the intergenerational aspect, and I don't want to, get us off topic, but I think, you know, the intergenerational response or reaction to both COVID and to, you know, the topic of racism, in particular Black Lives Matters, right, is pretty diverse, right? If you think of our parents, whether they're immigrant parents or, you know, parents of friends, you know, just that age difference brings, you know, really different perspectives, whether they're, you know, parents or grandparents' perspectives of having, you know, been actively a part of the civil rights era or other movements, right? Or parents that just have a slightly different perspective on these things. So I think it is really important to have, you know, these inclusionary, diverse conversations, to hear the different perspectives, to build upon, our own, blind spots and learning. And so anyway, I just wanted to just thank Kit for bringing it up because it's super important.
Anyone wanted to add anything to that before we moved on from it? Something I did want to lift that Kit and Melissa said around like one of the things that like being a theater company ourselves and like one of the big impacts that we are feeling repeatedly is the need to gather is so intrinsic and it's like gone to some extent. And Kit and Melissa talked about it from their practice. Cynthia, I was wondering if you could kind of talk to what the impact of that has been at like the Pao Arts Center, because it was there to kind of be that gathering space for the Chinatown community. What are you seeing there and like how are you all dealing with it?
Yeah, thank you, Karthik. I think there's no easy answer. I think as Melissa mentioned, we don't know the answers. Part of so much that's integral to Pao Arts Center identity is its physical space, being a gathering spot for artists, for community members, really a hub for the Chinatown community. And the question of elders is very impactful for us too, because we had like 10 classes, maybe almost every day of the week, a group of elders coming into our space and really appreciating the type of space it is and doing their cultural practice or Tai Chi or singing. And, even in January, December, we saw there was such a decline in numbers. And a lot of our programming is actually framed around current programming specifically, including Kit Melissa's program, including our residencies and our current exhibition was really framed around bringing intergenerational dialogue into our space. And so, I think we have, just like Kit and Melissa, we've had to reframe that because we just acknowledge that the challenges of reaching certain audiences are perhaps not doable or within our capacity. We don't have the ability to go out to the residents or community housing units with iPads or whatever to train them to use their equipment. But, recognizing that we are looking at this moment as an opportunity to connect more virtually because we're not defined by geography of Boston or greater Boston. Right. So, we're part of a learning circle of community development corporations or organizations that do placemaking work. And so we're in conversations with them. We're also thinking about, okay, so if we can't connect how we originally wanted to, is this a moment to connect more to a national dialogue? Since all of a sudden we aren't bound by geography. So even, one of our programs, Residence Lab, which trains a cohort of residents with artists to activate space in Chinatown. It's a great program in partnership with ACDC. Kit mentioned you worked with a long time ago. But, we're doing everything virtually, doing all the trainings virtually, and we've taken that opportunity to now have training sessions or facilitators from outside of Boston. So that, we're trying to look at the positives and what assets we can bring in and different ways to connect. So in many ways, it's a great opportunity for us. It's just a different opportunity than we had originally envisioned.
And Ben, you wanted to add on to that?
Well, to tie in a couple of other questions, I think, the Pao Arts Center is one of our strategies for building a strong and healthy community. And this idea of whether it's our elders or families or younger generation not having maybe as much access to the arts or other services, whether it's education or friends or the community at large. Not only like businesses, but the fact that this arts isn't available, the health of the community, might suffer. But at the same time, I think that the arts are going to need to play an important role, like everything else, education, our business community, et cetera, to to heal the community, to connect the community, to provide a space, whether it's a physical gathering space or a virtual one in the intermediate time period, to allow people to have conversations about how they're feeling or what they may be dealing with, to have connection to folks from inside their houses across the city or country. And so I think, the arts are well positioned, Cynthia and the programs are well positioned to do some of that work to kind of keep on the forefront this idea of, what is a healthy community, going forward.
And to, I think, bring that to a full circle, I think a little bit to the city council level, Michelle, I believe you're on the Arts and Council subcommittee, right? I think I was kind of curious as to what the conversations were at the city council level, both to the Chinatown, but even the kind of city level.
Yeah, and in fact, I was proud to I chaired the committee a few terms back, so it's been an area that's been near and dear to my heart. And I think in some ways, my own story and my own family experience is very closely intertwined with arts as one of the outlets that my parents had in this country when language was a barrier, and my mom finding her way to the community chorus and having to transcribe all the English into Chinese characters to be able to sing along. So it's always been an important part of my life, and the Pao Arts Center has been important as a parent trying to think about how to preserve connection to treasured culture and heritage. So we were maybe at one of the last events before the shutdowns with taking the kids in for Lunar New Year and coming home with the little calligraphy squares that they had made and all the activities that they had enjoyed doing there. On the council side, it's pretty dire. I mean, we see that unemployment is at the highest level since the Great Depression. Much of that is centered in communities that are least resilient to job loss, whether it's immigrant communities or residents of color. The hospitality industry, arts and tourism, many of these jobs are all interconnected. So when one event comes down, right, a show is canceled, a set of sports games are no longer happening. The ripple effect that has for our restaurants, for our other businesses. Boston's a small community, and so much of all the different strands of our economy are very closely woven together. So we're thinking about how we support artists as business owners and a really important part of the economy. I think there's still a lot of work to do there, and making sure that the reopening protocols and requirements line up with the reality of how we balance public health with trying to get people back on their feet as quickly as possible.
Thank you. I just want, before we, I think, kind of pivoted from this conversation, I was curious if anyone else had anything to add around this. Sweet. So moving to our other big thing that we wanted to get today was obviously around everything that's happening with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Black Lives Matters at this moment. We've started speaking to it in a couple of different kind of aspects. We talked about the intergenerational conversations that need to be had within our communities. We are talking about, there's obviously the idea of why solidarity matters. I know Asian American Commission in particular put out a great kind of open letter that laid out like the specifics of why API solidarity matters. And then something we didn't get to, but I would love to kind of dig into, is also the idea of like the model minority and like how that is sometimes used to pit and like divide our various communities. So with all of that to the context, I was wondering if anyone would want to get us started off. Within, and it could just be like, what is, how are you, what are the conversations around Black Lives Matters in the various spaces you'll occupy?
Karthik, I can maybe share a quick story. Just within our own organization, our youth center, our teen program, sort of coming to the end of the year. as a result of COVID-19, deciding as a youth group to create a letter in response to some of the anti-racism and or some of the racism towards the Asian community as a result of the pandemic. Then when, George Floyd's murder happened, like everyone or like many people, instantly feeling kind of in your heart and gut that that's not the focus, and needing to pivot with their response. And so, these 15, 16, 17-year-olds deciding that we need to actually have our letter about, Black racism and being an ally, and what does that mean? And I know they're still working on that, and I haven't seen it yet, but just to give you a sense that at least our young people, as I think all of us know, take this topic very seriously. And it may be from a different community, but they see that as, against their friends. And I think probably they see this maybe a little bit more clearly than some adults of what the connection is with the Asian community. So I'm excited and hopeful on that front that our teams are really engaged in this topic.
And Kit and Melissa, as y'all kind of, I know that Steve on staff had started kind of talking to y'all about this a little bit, but has that started informing your kind of process and conversations so far? And if so, how are y'all thinking about this in relation to some of the work you're doing either at Company One or outside of Company One?
Yeah, earlier we were talking about how the pandemic has limited large gatherings, but the pandemic has also created a lot of space for one-on-one conversations. And so I've always felt like a core value of mine being that the revolution starts at home, based on sort of like the idea based on the activist book and collection of essays around that topic. And I've been spending a lot of time at home with my family, sort of talking through what's happening in the world, talking about the movement for Black lives, talking about police brutality, anti-Black racism. Art is something that like you witness out in the world or on a screen, and you get to like take that and oftentimes digest that over dinner with your family or with a friend. And so I absolutely have been spending a lot of my time having one-on-one conversations or family conversations, and talking about the ways in which our at the center of what is most important is who is not at the table, who are most vulnerable folks in our communities, how our movements align, and how our history has intersected in terms of solidarity and helping each other. I was really reminded of this last night. I was watching this documentary called Crip Camp, and it's about a camp for disabled folks that existed from the 50s to the 70s. And there was a moment when they were having a sit-in at in San Francisco, and how the Black Panthers had shown up in terms of support for food, and then how some folks in the queer community has shown up with support for cleaning supplies. And so it was a real moment. I felt like where folks were really saying like, how can we do this together? And I think in this moment, that is also a very important part of the conversation, is how do we decenter our own voices and uplift Black leaders, Black movements, and Black power. And so that's a little bit of how we're thinking. I know, Melissa, you probably have some thoughts too on how this is a conversation we've had, prior to the recent police brutality that has been highlighted in the media, because this has been something happening in the country for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Kit, that a revolution does start at home, and having those one-on-one conversations with your family, having those conversations with people who are also Asian American that maybe just don't see things the same way that we do. They're hard conversations. They're not always easy, depending on who you're talking to and your family relationship, your family dynamic. It's something that I personally still struggle with and are working on. And those conversations are uncomfortable, but I also think that like discomfort is necessary, especially since as APIs, like we benefit from our proximity to whiteness, right? We benefit as well as are harmed from like the model minority myth, like those things, that we benefit from like at the expense of Black bodies, basically. So it's really important to have those conversations. The other thing I want to say is that as artists, I actually read something by Heathcliff Saunders recently on Medium about like Broadway being racist. And, there's like, us being a musical theater, that's actually a huge conversation coming up right now about like, what are the ways in which, the institutions like don't support Black voices and Black bodies. And that particular article talks about how artists use Black bodies on stage and how we have to be really thoughtful on how that is, like whether it's in an imagined reality where it's like, we don't see color, right? Or in a real reality where they're like, suffering or playing like maids or whatever, right? Like we have to be really conscious of what that looks like when we put Black folks in our art. And so those are things that like I'm thinking about, that I'm grappling with, that I'm still like educating myself on. So I think like that's where I'm coming from, is I feel like we as API need to like continue to educate ourselves and like just be better and do better.
Yeah, and there's something about that education part of it that resonates to me, because there's like beyond even like this moment and like the one-on-one conversations, there's something to the history of this conversation that feels like so relevant in the moment. When the Asian American Commission released the letters the first time, I actually like realized that the Dalit Panthers movement that had happened in India was inspired by the Black Panthers movement that obviously happened here, and how they were kind of integral to, let me see if I can guess his name, the Hart-Keller Act, which like opened up a lot of immigration for South Asians. And I have to imagine like not my family immediately, but definitely a lot of my community here. And yeah, just wanted to kind of name that, like, there's also something to know the history to inform the present moment. Michelle, do you mind talking to, obviously, I think as we're talking about the conversations and I think the identity pieces of it, you're most closely tied to the policy level on the city end. Could you speak to some of the work that's happening around this conversation there?
Yeah, we are in the thick of budget conversations at the city. The fiscal year ends June 30th, so there is essentially a little over 2 weeks left to understand how we can start to actualize some of the urgency and great frustration, but also momentum, the opportunity to start at home in Boston and think about our role in the national conversation, but what that means for actually moving things. I'll tick off a quick list of policing and police brutality directed reform changes that folks are hoping to see in terms of a civilian review board and licensing and decertification process, some accountability measures, also demilitarization, right? So thinking about how we are equipping, training, and interacting with community on the law enforcement side so that we can have the real conversation of what actually creates safety for all residents, especially communities of color, especially Black residents. And we're not doing so great with our current public, so-called public safety systems. What actually brings about justice? And we're not seeing that reflected in our criminal justice system today. So whether it's on the legislative side, the budget side, or just oversight in general, there is a lot of opportunity to move things at the city level. So I would just encourage everyone, I think we need to certainly do something in November, and there's a lot to take care of at the federal level, but in every community, there are little steps that can actually happen pretty immediately with public pressure and with coordination at the municipal level. So I would love to, if anyone has ideas, please reach out to me. I'd love to partner and be a platform for amplifying some of those ideas. But just remember that we can change things starting today, starting tomorrow. Policy is supposed to reflect the will of the people, and it's just about expressing your voice and making sure that you're holding each one of us policymakers accountable. We are here because of failures of government, and it's not, the burden shouldn't be on individual parents to have talks with their kids to behave a certain way, or for protesters to act in a certain, civil way to be able to be heard, et cetera, et cetera. It's really about policy, and it's in the hands of people who have been elected by residents to make some changes today.
And if I could use my platform to amplify a couple of other resources who seem to be doing that work, and if any people want to add, that'd be great, is I know Muslim Justice League, Families for Justice is Healing, ACLU MA have been doing great work, I think, contextualizing some of the budgetary conversations that are happening. Is there anyone else want to throw any names? Sweet, we'll take that. With that, and I'd love to kind of pivot to our final conversation point as we come to the end of this segment and before we take questions, is what for the people listening in, for the people who are listening in right now, and for the people listening in beyond this point, what are some of the ways in which they can kind of impact some of the things that we've talked about? Just what are some action items? Either within the work you're doing or within the organizations you occupy.
Well, I can start by sharing a creative way that people can kind of participate in kind of uplifting Chinatown, is that Pao Arts Center is plugged into a more national effort and project coming out of New York by the WOW project called Love Letters to Chinatown. And it's really exciting. As I mentioned before, this is an opportunity to connect to other Chinatowns across, actually in this case, nationally, and a city, I think Toronto in Canada, so technically internationally. But I believe Karthik has a slide that he can show later with a link that everyone can kind of share the love and share their stories and memories of Chinatown. And they'll be shared with Kit and Melissa, actually, as part of their project. As well as maybe in the future actually posted in Chinatown when we're ready to come back and reconvene and be together.
Hey, Karthik. I mean, one thing, many of us are doing, and especially in the Chinatown and immigrant communities, is really supporting the census, which, may be a simple thing, but just to plug that Census Day of Action is coming up, but just to talk about representation and policy, making sure that you're counted is such a huge part of that. So we're trying to get out people to fill that out, and then building upon that in November or anytime there's elections. The huge growth of Asians and Asian Americans in Massachusetts and everywhere, it is a reminder that Asians have a lot of political power. They can have their voices heard, and so need to, be engaged in the civic process, understand what's happening at your town hall or the city hall, and know that individually as well as collectively, you can make a difference and improve the life for your community.
Yeah, and to lift, I think, to the census conversation, Mass Voter Stables just sent out an e-blast, and it seems like next week there's like a set of actions around it. But the one thing that they did send out that kind of struck me, even though they had talked about it before, was how the communities in Chinatown, Dorchester, and Roxbury are historically undercounted and were undercounted in the last kind of census. I'm wondering if anyone could kind of speak to and I'm really looking at Michelle and Ben here maybe, but to the impact of why that count matters at like a very local level. That'd be great.
Yeah, it's so important. I think if you think of it as funding and representation, that captures most of it. The census and the numbers that come out of that count are the official way that dollars are given out by the federal government. So anytime that you are thinking about money for schools that eventually flows down to the local level, or funding for food access programs, our share relative to our population is only, the closer we can get to counting everyone, the closer we get to actually receiving our fair share. That also impacts, as others have said, the very important piece of political representation, where our district lines are drawn based on how many people are counted as voters and as people in those districts. And so we want to make sure Boston has been historically, the 9th hardest city to count among major metro areas. We have been behind this year because of COVID, and we just need a lot more help and awareness about why it matters and how easy it is. It takes 5 minutes. You can go online or reach out, and my office can also help make sure that you get access to filling out those forms.
Thank you, Michelle. With that, we've actually been collecting a couple of questions from the various mediums. I was hoping to get to one or two in the next 3 or 4 minutes so we can be quick about it. The one question I have is actually a theatrical question. So this is geared, I think, more towards Melissa and Kit. Have you all been following along the Twitter chain that's been happening between Young Jin Lee and Jeremy Harris? Great. So one of the questions from Dev Blair, hi Dev, someone who's been an actor on our stages, they asked, speaking of Broadway, what did Jeremy Harris's recent tweets about Young Jin Lee reveal about the relationship between the Black community and the Asian American community, especially in the context of theater?
Well, I mean, I think just to be really quick about it, I think it's really important to notice that, like, we as people of color, non-Black people of color, have our blind spots, and this is perfect. I mean, without really going into it and commenting into it too much, but just to say that, like, look, like, it, I do think, like, if something racist and messed up happened to you, like, that's totally valid, and like that happened to you, and it's not great, right? But you also have to examine, like, the things that you might have done to harm others. So that's all I'm saying, is that we all have blind spots. We need to educate ourselves. We need to confront those things when you get called out for it, and learn from it. I don't know, Kit, if you have any thoughts from that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Totally echoing what you just said. And also, I feel like particularly in the theater, this is a great example of, like, the uphill battle in terms of, like, how white dominated a space it is. It's such an art that is dominated by white narratives that we are sort of always fighting for a place at the table. And I'm more interested in a conversation that is sort of about, like, what does it look like when that table, we're at a different table, one in which we're undergoing some of the practices we're talking about today. And Melissa, you're saying, like, examining our own blind spots in terms of, like, how we have been complicit in anti-Black racism or perpetuated that kind of violence, and how being in the theater has sort of created that environment as well. And to just toggle back a little bit to your question, Karthik, about what we can do, and especially for us as artists and theater makers, I think it's about what we can do on an everyday level. Melissa and I particularly create pieces that have a lot of roots in reality. And so we create a world on stage that reflects the world that we live in. And so, like, our folks in the community at that table, our Black folks there, our disabled folks there, our trans folks there, our Indigenous folks there, our elders there, like, who is part of this art making. And so it feels very important to address, like, the issues that we have that are highlighted by this Young Jin Lee and Jeremy Harris Twitter conversation happening right now by actually doing the work in our everyday art making to have these conversations.
And the one thing I would like really quickly add to that, like, the thing that reflected for me was at Company One, at one point we did a positionality exercise, and it was about, like, identifying your privileges that you bring to the table, and like, it's actually striking to me that coming from India, of like what it, like the direct like story to that is, while I did this exercise, like something that struck me as being South Asian, Indian, Brahmin, coming up until I was 13, the level of privilege that I held there was very similar to the privilege that like a white man here might have. And like, what does that kind of do to this conversation when you also add the immigrant narrative to it? Just felt kind of relevant. Do you mind sticking around for one other question, and then we'll call it good after that? Great. Mark Vanderzee, and this question actually was directed to Michelle, was how do you imagine arts and artists as agents of change of policy in Boston? Where is the room for them? And what does the support from the city look like at this moment?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's been incredibly inspiring just to be part of this conversation and see our, many folks here are involved in arts in ways, but are sort of artist designees so loud in calling for arts to be the vehicle and the unifying force for us to actually deliver progress for everyone. I think we need to do a lot better at the city. Boston is blessed because we have a richness of resources here, large institutions, but even more importantly, I think such a wealth of diverse, inclusive, grassroots, community-based arts organizations and resources. And we don't do a good job, honestly, of coordinating and lifting up and supporting all of that publicly. There have been some efforts around, should Boston be putting more of our public budget to that? Could we be doing more to provide housing or co-working spaces, sort of work and live artist studios in different places that are also affordable. Artists are a huge part of our economy here. So I will be eager to hear ideas from folks on what specific ways you might want to partner or get involved. I know I always pledge to be in community and listening to those who want to put forward their ideas and see how the city can support them.
Thank you so much. I know we ran a little bit over, but when I have a panel as great as you, it's kind of hard not to make the most of it and get the most amount of conversations going. Thank you so much for being here. With that, we have one other thing, if I can find my place. I believe we're actually going to hand it off to the second video that Melissa put together for us. I'm going to hand that off to for that transition. Thank you all.
One, we are the people. Two, a little bit louder. Three, we want justice across the whole world. One, we are the people. Two, a little bit louder. Three, we want justice across the whole world. We are 99 voices sounding, 99 hearts are pounding, 99, let me break it down and rise up, you are 99% surrounded, brothers strong and sisters grounded, 99 real and 99 now, no we won't bow down, come on, one, we are the people, two, a little bit louder, three, we want justice across the whole world, one, we are the people, two, a little bit louder, we want justice across the whole world. Under pressure, we crack, we rise up and we take it back. Oh, 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 oh. Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? That's right, get a little bit louder. What can't hear you a little bit louder? Take it back, get up, get down. There's a revolution in this town. They held me back and they shot me down. They locked me up when I'm down and out. Got nothing to lose and got nothing to prove. So you're damn sure gonna hear me shout. One, we are the people. Two, a little bit louder. Three, we want justice across the whole world. One, we are the people. Two, a little bit louder. Three, we want justice across the whole world. are the people. 2, a little bit louder. 3, we want justice across the whole world.
Hello? Oh, great. All right. Well, thank you all so much. That was such a great conversation and just so invigorating and exciting. So thank you all so much to our panelists for joining us. What a great conversation that will be available for you all to view on YouTube and also here on our Facebook. And thank you to Melissa for such a powerful message and so timely reminding us of needing justice and wanting justice. So thank you so much for that as well. So yeah, I just wanted to point everyone to our resources. Thank you for joining us for our first episode. If you want more resources, more information on our panelists, their bios, you can head to company1.org/betterfuture. And if you enjoyed today's program, please consider making a donation to Company One, and you can support more events just like this. So you can also head to company1.org/donate. We'll see you again soon in the next month, mid-July, for our second episode, which is Reimagining Summer in Upham's Corner, which will be featuring Cara Elliott Ortega, who is the Chief Arts and Culture Chair for the City of Boston. And there will be more guests who will be announced soon. So thank you all so much. We appreciate you tuning in and sending questions. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.